Are we doing the MDC tonight? Because you mentioned it, Diana. Is that? No, no, that was just a reminder. Okay, fine. So we'll get straight into our. Can we have the lights off as well, please? I think, or most of them for a minute, because Mike will want to chat to us. So this is the first print competition of the year. Our judge tonight is Mike White, and he will be presenting and critiquing live. Well, he's actually going to read his critique because he can't remember them. No, that's too complicated. So I'll just tell you about Mike. Most of you will know him, but he's a professional astrophotographer and New Zealand landscape photographer based in Twizel. Mike is taking a break from society memberships this year as he continues to develop his photography workshop business, Earth, Sky and Space. Mike holds an associate distinction from the PSNZ and a Master of Photography distinction from the NZIPP. He has won a number of photographic awards, including the Laurie Thomas Trophy in 2024. That's the New Zealand Landscape Salon, and has been twice shortlisted for the International Astronomy Photographer of the Year. Mike also enjoys other aspects of nature photography, such as macro and wildlife photography. So I'll hand over to Mike now, and please enjoy the show.
Cool. Thanks, Di.
You need a light.
I'll need a bit of light.
Yeah, sorry. We have a light. Which one went off? Oh, sorry, thank you. Just so you can read. Oh.
Brilliant. Yeah, memory's not quite as good as it used to be, so prepping the notes first is quite helpful. G'day, folks. It's great to be back at CPS for the night and to see all your mostly familiar faces, but good to see a good number of new members as well. Thanks for inviting me to judge your first print of the year. It's hard to believe we're already into March, but here we are. Having submitted many prints of my own into CPS competitions since becoming a member back in 2018, it's once again a privilege to be able to assess the work of CPS members. As many of you know, I'm a firm believer in printing, so I really appreciate that a good number of you have taken part in this round of competition. As I said before, regardless of the scores that you receive, you should be proud of having the confidence to print and display your work, and even more so the confidence to submit that work for assessment by another photographer. So I hope that all of you that have got printed work up here have a space to display it, of the visual evidence of the progress of the journey that you're on in photography. I do note that some haven't heeded previous advice regarding presentation of your prints. So just a timely reminder, your awarded work is exhibited at the end of the year for family and friends. So you want it looking its best when it's up on display. I very much appreciate that printing incurs additional cost, and that a lot of you like to reuse your mats and things like that, and that's absolutely fine. Just I would encourage you that once your mats start to show signs of aging, that perhaps you let them retire and put a new mat in. So just a couple of tips for submitting printed work. The mount should be securely attached to the rear of the mat board on all sides. There's a few prints that we've got where they're just hinged on one side and the mount is open like a book. And when we've got a big stack of prints being judged and being transported, it just allows the potential for damage to your print or someone else's work. So the best thing to do is make sure all four sides are taped up. And that if you use double-sided tape, you can run a razor through it and open the mount back up when you get the print back. I was very sad to have to disqualify one entry this time round, as it had become completely separated from its mount. And so therefore I couldn't actually see the print because it had slid right out of the mount. When I'm assessing prints, I do look at the physical presentation. So I get the digital image that you'll see on screen, and that's just where I make the notes. I'm actually looking at the print to judge it. So I'm judging the whole thing, including presentation. Unintentional white space around the print in terms of unprinted paper is best avoided by making sure that your mat is cut to a slightly smaller size than your final printed image, or vice versa, making sure you get the person who's doing your print to make a little larger than the mat window, so that it's covered on all four sides, unless you have a deliberate border in place. If there are any marks on the face of the mat, that doesn't come into it, because I know a lot of that often happens during transit and handling. So it's probably enough on that. Just a note on the back of your prints, when you're reusing mats and things, sometimes the tape can start to lift off, and that can also catch other people's prints. So when you take your mat home, just have a look at the back, and if there are rough edges, just put some tape over them so that it smooths the mat back out and lessen the chance of scratching someone else's work. So that's just a few comments on presentation. Just remember, as far as scoring goes and selection criteria, that CPS has its own scoring requirements. And so it does mean that a number of prints don't necessarily receive an award. So if you haven't seen print judging before, not every image gets an award tonight. But no award doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad photograph. It just means that out of all the images submitted, not every print gets to be displayed at finals night, because you need to hire the art gallery and take over all their wall space for all the prints that get submitted during the year. Some of the unawarded prints will have a flaw or weakness that can be addressed, and of course you can resubmit that in a later competition, and that also means you have another person looking at your work if you choose to resubmit it. As always, I do hope you'll find my comments insightful or helpful. If you don't agree with them, that's absolutely fine. Both outcomes mean that you're developing as a photographer and you're finding, refining, or already confident of your own photographic style. So that's great as well. So once again, I congratulate each of you for taking the time to print your work and submit it for assessment in this competition. And on a personal note, the new home is nearly ready to go. We hope to be in within the month, and we'll be able to do a proper cup of tea. We'll have found the tea and coffee and the kettle and cups and all that sort of stuff. So if you're passing through Twizel, please do reach out and come and say hello and come and see the new house. All right, so we'll get underway. I'll get that back to all of that. Okay, so we've got 36 images. So the first set of images are scored a 1. First image, please. So we've got a classic rural high country scene here, snow-capped mountains, golden light across the hills, and a flock of sheep. I'm intrigued by the almost painterly effect of the clouds in the sky, but I am slightly puzzled at how the sky is so uniformly blue across the top of the frame, brightening towards the lower left. However, the source of the lighting in the landscape appears to be coming from the right, from a sun that's much closer to the horizon. It almost feels like two different images to my eye. In contrast to the softness of the cloud, I feel as though the sheep in particular appear to have some digital artifacts that could be the result of some over-sharpening during post-processing. Sorry, I'm just going to look for the arrow key here. I do like a backlit keyboard. There we go. So one other thing I noticed just with the sheep in particular, oops, I just scrolled too far, so I'm going to go back to one. So with the light on the snow, particularly in that middle stream coming down and on the sheep as well, there's quite a number of blown out highlights there. So perhaps a slightly faster shutter speed would allow you to just reduce that exposure a little bit more and keep the detail in those highlights rather than just being pure white. So overall though, in my opinion, the photographers created a nice balanced composition. There's some nice symmetry happening with the lines of both mountains coming in from the left and right. The sky, the midground and the background, and the foreground fall into the horizontal thirds. So there's a nice tidy composition there, and that helps create a sense of calm, which I'm sure is a feeling many of our visitors are looking for as they flock to the rural countryside to see scenes just like that. Okay, next print. Really hard to drive past a field of flowering rapeseed, isn't it? When the sun's shining, blue sky, bright yellow flowers, and clearly the scene caught the photographer's eye, as well as those who are out exploring in the scene that we can see. In choosing to remain so far from the subjects, though, we aren't able to see any facial expressions. So for me, the story isn't really about those people. And the photographers possibly made the image from quite a distance away, and they may not have even known that they're being photographed at the time in a way that allowed them to interact with the photographer. So while it's clear to see what's happening in terms of they're posing for photos and things, I feel that the three of them are too static in the scene to hold any interest. What does actually grab my eye is that little pop of red just over to the left. And when I saw that, I thought, wow, what is that? Is it a baseball cap? Is there, does it belong to one of the people? Is there another kid hiding down in the flowers? Maybe that small element could have been turned into something more and formed the central point of focus for the scene. But keep exploring those fields of colour as we come into next spring, and you may find a stronger way to tell the story that you had in mind for this one. So we move on to score 2. I have a friend born in Zimbabwe, and whenever she lives up in Waiheke Island, up in Auckland there, and whenever she gets a nice orangey sunset, she always posts on Facebook and with a comment about how it's an African sky tonight. And the print here reminds me of that sentiment because African sunsets really are something, aren't they? The vibrant orange hue has been well captured, and I enjoy the symmetry of the tree silhouettes. In my opinion, I think I would have preferred some more negative space out to the left of the tree on the left-hand side of the frame, as the scene just feels a little bit cramped at the moment, and I want to feel that big African sky from the print. The tops of the trees currently sit on about the halfway line through the scene. I just feel that perhaps a crop down, taking off about a quarter of the sky, would help frame the whole scene in a slightly more dynamic way, and perhaps even add a bit of a cinematic quality to the print. And I think the combination of that would help evoke all that expanse and emotion that comes from an African sunset. I do particularly like the wee hint of cloud that's coming through just along the base of the sun. In terms of the printing, I think the choice of the semi-gloss paper works really nicely to hold the colour without being too much, and that the print was nicely presented. Score 2. We have here an imposing portrait of a martial eagle, and it's certainly captured from a perspective that caught my attention. For me, most of the interest lies in the head of the bird with those piercing yellow eyes. I feel as though the photographer either needed to really zoom right in onto the head or to zoom out a little bit more so that we get more of a sense of the environment that the bird's in. As it is, the branch of the tree that the bird's standing on just appears quite bright to my eye. And I think a little bit of burning or darkening and post-processing would have just helped reduce some of the focus on that area, bringing it back to the bird. A wee bit of the white feather detail just on the bird's breast. It's been lost due to overexposure. So that means we've clipped the whites. And I think looking at your EXIF data, I don't remember what the specifics were, but I'd try lowering the ISO for this particular scene, as it was shot at 1600, maybe come back a stop to 800. And it's possible that that data may actually be recoverable in post-processing using a highlight recovery tool. So it's just something to take into account before you hit the print button. Given the size of the birds, I think the photographers certainly captured the portrait from a great perspective though. It gives the bird a sense of power and dominance as we look up into its steely gaze. So just waiting for the computer to transition here. Okay, the next print, rider. Some great elements captured in this print, some bold, punchy colour. I particularly like seeing the repeated line of the curved lines from the rubber being laid down across the racetrack. I also quite like the nice crisp shadow. I feel it's quite a strong supporting element, forming a triangle for us to look at in the centre of the frame between the rider, the bike and the ground. Although the angle of the bike and the rider suggests that this is a scene that's happening at high speed, I think that because the subject's been placed right in the middle of the frame, it actually creates quite a static photograph in my view. And I think there's a lot of unnecessary tarmac, particularly up to the left of the image. I think if you applied a crop, taking out a little bit of the top, a lot of the left, and a wee bit of the bottom, and balancing that so that there's an equal amount of tarmac around top, left, and bottom, and then a larger expanse out to the right, that you'd end up with a much more dynamic scene, and you'd have space out to the right for the rider to continue riding through into. I think it would give you a much more dynamic scene. Overall, I see a slight softness in the print, particularly noticeable around the printed letters and numbers on all the signage and things on the bike and the clothing. So I think the shutter speed used may have either been just a little bit slow, or potentially the focal point that was selected has ended up just behind where the subject is now sitting. So the sharp plane of focus is just behind the rider on the bike there. So just maybe think about picking a pre-focus point so that when they come through, when you press the shutter, the rider is in exactly the right point of focus as you come through. No doubt though, capturing motorsports such as this comes with a number of challenges, and seeing the photographer getting out there and giving it a go and putting it into print is great. Peeling back time. As I look at this photograph, or at this print, I get a really good sense of a bright and colourful past that's been hidden away behind a bland and unlasting exterior. Personally, I feel it's quite fitting and parallel to our modern world as we rush to build bland, generic buildings to house ourselves in. But the new and modern facades end up crumbling away and cracking, while the historical remnants remain firm and strong underneath. And I think that the photograph tells that story really well. In terms of technique, I think there's an overall softness that you see more when you look at the print, and it contrasts that gritty story that's being told. And I think it could have been resolved with a bit more attention to some pre-print sharpening using one of the tools available in post-processing. Could be a limitation of the optics. You might have been shooting it with a lens close to a diffraction limit, or perhaps the final print was an enlargement. This is something to be mindful of when you're making a larger print, because I think this one was quite a nice large image that's been printed there. Just making sure that you're capturing all those little intricacies to hold the story together. In essence, when I see the print, it looks like a photo on paper. And I think if the texture had been captured nice and sharply, you could feel as if you could reach through and touch that brick and scrape your finger along it. And that's what I was looking for with that one, because I think the story's brilliant. A final thought for the photographer. This is just me sharing my musings for you to think about. Did you consider rotating the composition 90 degrees and placing the red brick at the top of the frame? I think it would give the scene a slightly more abstract quality, and it might also end up leaving the image feeling a little less top heavy. It's perfectly fine as it is. It's just, have you thought about maybe seeing how it looks that way? Well done to the photographer, keeping an eye out for the little details and telling stories like this. Bubbles and flow. This print to me is an abstract piece full of interesting texture that's been created by the water surface. For me though, most of that interest sits on the left-hand side of the print with a focus on the bubbles. Referring to the EXIF data, there's a relatively high shutter speed that was used, and in my opinion that didn't really allow for a sense of flow to be taken from the photograph to connect back to the title. In terms of printing presentation, I did know that there's some overcuts in the corners of the mount. That's something to watch out for if you are making your own mats. If someone's cutting them for you and you pick it up and it's got overcuts, ask them to cut another one for you. I feel the photographer does have an interesting idea to work with here. And I'd encourage you to keep iterating on the concept that you're working with in that print, and keep drilling down and refining it. Right, the next print. To me, this one's a perfect example of how we all interpret images in different ways. The photographer titled the image "Like a Candle in the Wind," which gives a strong hint as to how they see the image. However, when I first picked up the print and looked at it, I was drawn to the shape in the middle. And to me, it appears as a reminiscent of a fish jumping back into the water. So yeah, we all see things in different ways. In my opinion, the translucency of that central element is really quite beautiful. We've got the gentle ripples spread across the surface of that element. And for me, I'm less drawn to the heavier, darker element at the bottom of the frame. In terms of presentation with the style of photography, there's a number of soft, dark spots up along that lower third. They look like sensor spots. They're not, because they're all in a straight line. They're probably water droplets hitting the water further out. But for this sort of work, I think that removing those in post-production would help keep the background a little more visually simple and make it a wee bit more of a graphic piece. So just thinking about those little elements. In terms of presentation, just keep in mind when you're mounting that the matte window covers the image fully, because there was a tapered edge of white paper exposed in the matte. The final thing I'll point out here, just in that top droplet right at the top, there's a lovely little hint of a sort of magenta blue colour. And for me, that was a really cool thing to find amongst the otherwise monochromatic palette. Mirror cube. Uh, wow, this must be the ultimate treehouse. Um, I would love to stay there. I think the photographer's captured a lovely travel memory here. And seeing photos like this now makes me want to go and visit Sweden and go and stay there. When photographing snow, it can be difficult for camera metering to give you the right answer with your exposure. We've got quite a bright overcast sky to work with. And as a result, what I'd recommend you do when you shoot scenes like this is increase your exposure. And that would have given the print an overall lift in brightness. And I think perhaps that might have been more the mood that we're looking for. When you do that, you can then bring the highlights back down so that you don't clip the detail in the sky. You sort of get the best of both worlds. Lifting the exposure would have also had the benefit of bringing out those gorgeous red and orange warmer tones in the trees. And that would have given us a really lovely contrast in the scene. And as much as it's a winter wonderland, it would have given it a real sense of warmth. And given it somewhere that you can go and stay, I think that little bit of warmth would have really helped the print. I think the photographer's done a nice job of the composition, using the vertical trees to frame the house, and the diagonals of the wee bridges there, forming a leading line up to the tree house. Cool, so this one is a really good example of when you have a print competition, you've got to come and check out the prints on the wall. Because what the photographer's done here is add another layer to the image, literally, that you don't see in the digital presentation. For myself, when I picked up the print, I was quite drawn to it at first glance. It's a moody landscape with the majority of the scene in shadow, just a few areas lit by the sun, and a beautiful stream of water plunging over the rocks. I think overall the photograph's nicely composed, and I particularly like the panoramic format to display this particular scene. For me though, the print is printed much darker than what you're looking at there. So when you go out and look at the print later, for me, that print is too dark to fully appreciate all the detail and texture that we actually have in the scene. I believe the photographers used what I think is the encaustic wax treatment on the print, and that's what I mean by having a look at the print after with that extra layer of detail texture in there, which to me really nicely echoes some of the textures that are happening underneath. So I think it's quite clever and nicely done. That technique does work better in some parts of the print than in others. So what I'd encourage you to do there is just continue developing that technique and refining it. And I think you'll get some quite stunning results, particularly if you're working with landscapes like this. And again, just some minor overcuts around your matte opening, which just let the presentation down just a wee bit. Gorgeous close-up of a Kia preening itself. No doubt fully aware of the photographer and the camera. It's an admirer. For me, I've noticed in recent years, since, post-COVID, I think Kia seem to be generally less enamoured of humans. They don't seem to be as prolific in the places where they used to be, and often seem to sit higher up above the alpine areas. So it's lovely to see that a photographer captured a nice moment with this one. Overall, with the print, I find that the image lacks a little life and vibrancy. Kia have got beautiful, rich colour in their feathers, and I know what you're seeing on the digital image is quite different to what's been printed. So if you had more vibrancy and saturation in the print to bring out that feather detail, I think that really would have elevated the image. If you're printing your own work, that's something for you to look through. If you're getting someone else to print though, maybe have a chat with them about colour reproduction because what you're getting out isn't what you're putting in. So you need to have a look at that and resolve that. Just a minor detail, but with the bird's eye, I would like to see that just elevated in brightness a wee bit. It just feels a little bit dark and lifeless as it's presented in the print. And of course, we know care to be anything but lifeless. So just a little bit more exposure or adjustment of the contrast curve or something, just to lift it a wee bit. Nicely mounted for presentation though. Balancing in the wind. I see some great potential for this print. It's a high key style. We've got portrait of a silver eye balancing in the wind. Just talking about what we see in the print, there's some very harsh edge artifacts. You can probably pick them up on the screen as well. That suggests to me the background has been removed, possibly, or something along those lines. And what it's resulted in is some of the edges are very sharp and harsh and disconnected from their neighbouring elements. So the end result to me starts to look unnatural. It was obviously a windy day, we've got that in the title. And there's some motion blur evident, which is obviously coming from the wind. So what I'd suggest when you're shooting scenes like this is going for a much faster shutter speed, and you want to try and freeze that action. And open your aperture as wide as you can as well, because you want to capture all the light that you can. I found the print to be quite noisy. The EXIF data said the photo was taken at ISO 3200. I think with the noise reduction tools that we've got available now, if you'd applied some of that or applied more of that in post-processing, should have been able to clean up a lot of that noise that's evident in the print. Overall, I think the concept and the composition are really quite lovely, and I hope whoever's work this is, that you keep persisting with this sort of scene, because I think make a lovely print for a nature lover or a bird photographer, bird watcher to hang on their wall. Beauty in the burn. So when I look at this print, my first instinct was I'm looking at an almost apocalyptic scene. There's a stand of trees amongst the darkened remnants of a burnt landscape. The main subject's in the middle there, lifeless, bare. And a little further back, we've got bush that hasn't been touched by the fire. It shows us the cruel randomness of the path of wildfire. I think the brightly lit portions of the foreground really help to separate the elements and create some depth in the scene. And I think the photographer's waited for the right natural light and moment to shoot that. With the printing, I overall feel that it's come out too dark. The midground bush behind those main subjects could have done with just a little bit of a lift in exposure, just to create a wee bit more separation from the main trunks and that line of bush in the background. The upper branches of the trees, our main subjects, appear to be very soft. And what I was looking for was a nice crisp outline of those trees against the sky. Instead, what I'm seeing is that the branches and the sky all sort of muddy together around the edges. And I think there should just be a wee bit more separation between those objects. And the monochromatic treatment is absolutely fitting for this type of scene, though, I think. And what I'd encourage you to do is explore your black and white conversion process to increase the tonal range of the image, so that where you do have the brightest tones, you are nudging up towards full white. And in your darker shadows, which you do have, that you're down at the other end of the blacks and using that whole range. At the moment, the print is compressed and only using about 2/3 of that range. I think you could open that up and really give it some life. As the photographer says, though, there's beauty in the burn. And with fire being a natural part of regeneration and everything, maybe not so apocalyptic after all. So a nice print. We move on to the first of the acceptances now, score 3. The gannet's dive captures a great sequence as the gannet folds its wings before penetrating the water's surface looking for a meal. I'd encourage the photographer to consider a much tighter crop. I think there's currently a surplus of background that it actually acts to diminish from taking the action away from the scene, from what you're capturing. A minor point, but when you're compositing the image or whatever technique you've used to put this together, what I would have really liked to see is equal spacing between each bird. At the moment, just as the bird's about to hit the water, the spacing between the bird starts to reduce, which suggests to me that it's actually slowing down. And we know it would actually be getting faster before it impacts the water. Overall, I think the photographers made effective use of the technique though. I think it tells a much bigger story than what a single exposure would have done. From a presentation point of view, it might be time to retire your mat. There's some creasing on the upper corner, some overcuts, and the matte surface appears to be yellowing. It probably isn't made out of archival materials. So it's aging, like all of us. If you'd popped it in a really crisp white matte, I think that would have elevated the image yet again and really showcase it. A giraffe and impala in Kruger Park. Wow. I've always wanted to go to Africa and photograph the wildlife. For me, it's one of those bucket list sort of trips that probably most photographers have on their list. Because it's the dream of seeing these animals in the natural environment, not behind the cages of a zoo. And hopefully I'll get to do it at least once in my lifetime. So hopefully this was just one of many thrilling moments for whoever the photographer is on this trip. Compositionally, I like the overall design of the photo, with the giraffe forming the apex of a triangle, the impala forming the base. What I would suggest is considering a slight crop from the right, not too much, probably just coming in about past where that wee black rock or log is, and having an equal amount of distance to left and right of the base of the impala. What works really nicely with the impala is that the two animals on the ends are both looking outwards. There's a beautiful symmetry there, which is really quite nice. The key distraction in the print for me is unfortunately the giraffe decided to look away. But more than that, it's positioned very close to the top of the frame. The digital image actually has a little bit more headroom than the print. So in the print, the giraffe's head's very close to the matte border. What you could consider exploring, because it's an open competition, is using something like content-aware fill and expanding the background above the giraffe to create some more negative space up there. I think if you'd done something along those lines, just would have created a little bit less tension in the photo and added to that sense of calm and peace, watching the animals do their thing. And of course, if the giraffe had looked at you, you would have been able to get a higher score. Nevertheless, the photographer's captured a beautiful scene that leaves me wanting to be there, and that's arguably the goals of any photographer. Grey warbler. I love hearing grey warblers. They're a delight to hear when you're out in the bush, and the photographers capture a lovely portrait of one, in my opinion. I very much appreciate that when we're photographing wildlife, we often don't get more than a moment or two to take the shot. However, I find the midground foliage is a little distracting, particularly the twigs around the back part of the bird. I wonder if perhaps you'd widen the aperture. this was captured at f11 to maybe f8 or even 5.6, would still have given you enough sharpness on the bird, and then just start to soften some of the background and midground twigs. Sorry, not the background, just the midground. The background, I think, is beautiful. The bokeh that we've got there, it's lovely and soft, beautiful colour. And overall, I think everything's well exposed. The bird's lovely and sharp, and the highlights are nicely controlled in what's obviously quite bright sunny conditions. And I also like that you've left space in that top right corner for the bird to fly off into. The print's been well handled. The colours are, they've got a lovely natural colour in the print and a good level of brightness too. That's a good job. All right, so a little bit about me. When I judge prints, I don't look at the titles to start with. When I look at the print and I take it out of the box, I'm looking at the image and looking for a story or looking at what you're showing me. And when I did that with this one, I found the photograph quite challenging in some ways. The in focus part of the frame, over on the right-hand third there, shows what appears to be something like a rack of jewellery or something along those lines in a market. And I feel, though, that the photographer is just using those as framing elements, that the right third and the left third, to frame the central figures in the centre of the scene. So in other words, I don't think the photograph's about the jewellery, it's about the people. So the elements do a nice job of setting the scene and creating a sense of place, so it draws us into the story. For me, though, other than seeing two figures walking towards us and the central figure walking away, it just leaves me unsure about what the story is actually about. So then I flip the print over to have a look at the title, and it's assignation. So I can tell you all sorts of interesting things out of the building code at the moment, but I had no idea what the word assignation currently meant. So I looked it up, Googled it, and Cambridge said it's a meeting that is secret or not allowed, especially one between two people having a romantic relationship. I was like, aha. So with the title, one can now imagine that the central figure could be well on their way to some such rendezvous, their identity secret, their features unknowable, as though there's some secret pact with the photographer who's captured that moment. For me personally, while titles can be used to give clues to the story, I don't think they should be relied upon to tell the story. What I do think the photographer's done is made great use of using a frame within a frame. It sets up that story with human subjects. The colours, the texture, the clothing, they all take us to that faraway place. I just don't feel that the combination of figures that we have in the print tell the story or support the story that the photographer is trying to tell us. I think it works really well as a travel scene, and it certainly does a nice job of capturing all the exotic materials and things that you see. And that's where my eye goes back to with this one. All right, the kookaburra. Whether or not it's a gum tree, I don't know. But the childhood memories of a certain tune, I'm sure we all know, suddenly pop up in my head when I saw the photographer's print showing a lovely portrait of a kookaburra. For me, it's a lovely, simple photograph. It's well executed. The composition works. The framing of the bird against the background bokeh works. There's no distracting elements there. I really like the gentle leaves coming down from the top of the frame, just holding your eye down onto the bird. And the subject's been photographed nice and sharp. The only point for me really is only a little point. Just above the bird's eye, up and to the right, in that lighter feathered area, just a wee bit of overexposure that you might have been able to bring back with some highlight recovery, post-processing. Or it could be that the bird's eye is actually quite dark and just the contrast is quite strong in that area. Maybe just have a little wee play with that. Just that wee spot at the moment as it's shown, or as it's been printed, it just contrasts against the rest of the image, which has a lovely soft quality to it, and just feels a lot more gentle against that little sharp bit there. I think the monochrome treatment's really nice, creates a classic sort of wildlife portrait for you, I think. The print's been nicely produced and mounted, and I think because of the overall gentleness of the image, maybe think about printing it on matte paper, just to enhance that story. Okay, next we have Lost Among the Leaves. We're still in score 3 acceptances. My curiosity's piqued with this my first look at this scene. What did the sign originally say? There's no further clues. We've only got what the photographer's given us. So I start to ask questions about its former life. What was the sign? What did it say? Where's it for? And once I finished exploring the texture around that, my eye then starts to travel around the frame, looking at the decaying leaves. The red leaf down the bottom, or petal, it certainly creates a point of contrast. For me, I find it just a wee bit distracting. I just wonder if the photographer could consider desaturating it a wee bit, if the leaf was already there, or if it was placed, whether it actually needed to be there to be part of the story. Well done to the photographer for telling us a wee story of decay, nicely mounted and printed too. Poppy. As Kiwis, we're intimately familiar with red poppies and their association with Anzac Day. Probably less of us are aware of white poppies, also being a symbol of remembrance for all victims of war and a hope for peace. Quite timely at the moment. I think the photographer's captured that sense of peace well with the print. There's sharpness where it needs to be, right in the central part of the flower, and the photographer's allowed focus to fall off towards the front and back of the flower. The light, or the quality of light overall, is quite beautiful. It highlights the intricate structure of the petals. To my eye, there's just a touch of overexposure over in the right-hand petals. Just something to watch when you're putting it through to print. But the background exposure, I think, works really nicely, gives context to where the poppy is without stealing attention. The print's well presented. I think you picked the right paper. Being a semi-gloss, it gives a nice little bit of vibrance to the yellows without being too much. And it gives the soft whites there a nice bit of life. Next we have Iris. Just going to have a quick drink. So there's another one where I look at the print and I go, wow. And you'll see it in the comment, wow, because that's what pops into my head when I look at the image first. It's the first impact. The colours of the iris are so striking. There's so much beauty in the natural world, and I think the photographer's captured the hues of this magnificent flower beautifully. It's for that reason, the presence of the beautiful natural colour, that I'm actually distracted by the photographer's decision to present just the flower against what appears to be an artificially created background using some sort of colour gradient. It may be some other technique, but that's how I'm interpreting it. For me, that background is just too clean. It's too artificial, and it doesn't feel like a realistic part of the photographic scene overall. And for me, I find that quite jarring in the print. So I was thinking, how could you resolve that? One of the options, the photographer could consider retaining the flower's stem to ground the subject and perhaps serve to reduce the disconnect between the subject and the background. I did have a look for some examples to see if I could direct you somewhere. And Paul Coughlin has some beautiful work that is of a similar vein, and so perhaps you could check out his work for some inspiration. I think the photography of the flower itself is beautiful. I just encourage you to remember that it's, the print as a whole that we're looking at. And so it's not just about the subject. It's easy to sort of get drawn in just to the subject without looking at the rest of it. I definitely think that the photographer's on the right track though, and just needs to keep iterating as part of your creative process. The art of blade sharing. I don't know, for me, you've really got to feel for sheep when they're being manhandled during shearing. It's amazing to watch professional shearers at work, and even more so when they're competing against the clock. With this scene, the shearer's facial features are hidden by their cap. So it brings the focus onto the sheep. I can almost see in the sheep its sense of resignation to its fate, of being shorn of its wool to please its human master. For me personally, I probably would have preferred to see how hard the shearer is working by seeing some of those facial features. But I think the photograph still works on a different level, perhaps, by nudging us to think about things from the sheep's perspective. I'm not sure that's what the photographer had in mind, though, with the title, The Art of Blade Sharing. But that's my take. Overall, the scene's well captured, good honest reflection of life on the farm. How wonderful it must have been to observe these two elephants together. We see what appears to be a man-made watering hole, and I wonder whether in the area that you're in, where there's insufficient natural water resources for the elephants to drink at, so they end up having to come to a man-made area. I think the panoramic crop works well. It keeps our attention on the elephants and minimises the amount of background for our eye to wander around. The print appears a little bit soft to my eye, and just some sharpening before you print the image may help with that. I do note that ISO was at 6400, so perhaps the conditions at the time you photographed this were still quite dark out, and that may well contribute to the softness and grain that's in the print. There are some really good noise reduction tools and sharpening tools, though, that you can apply in post-production, and that will lift the image to another level. The action's nicely captured here. I like how the water drops are coming out, they're sort of sprayed away in nice little arcs. So I do appreciate that little detail. Let's just hope these wonderful animals don't always have to rely on us to be able to survive. Abstract boats in the harbour. I found this abstract piece to be quite interesting at first glance. It's using what I think is an ICM technique. And I think what the photographer's done is use the motion of the camera, creating an interesting textural overlay within the scene. For me, that texture comes through as mimicking the flow of water. So I think it ties together nicely. The vertical lines of the boat masts give a nice sense of structure to the image. Although I find the dark line coming in from the left to be quite distracting and dominating. I think perhaps given it's an open competition, if you'd taken that out, it would better help to maintain the overall feel of the rest of the scene if you'd removed that. I think the colours are quite lovely. The orange hue reminds me of the Canterbury Nor'wester, and it works nicely in contrast to the blues in the remainder of the scene. What I do appreciate is the photographer's choice to go with a square crop too. I think it serves the final photograph well. Next we have Shadowlands. What first drew me to this print are the intensity of the blues. Blues can be really hard to print nicely, and I think the photographer's done a nice job here. The silhouetted subject is quite busy, but it's held together by the sweeping curve from the main trunk up through to the top of the tree. There is a small twig, excuse me, that is cut off by the right-hand side of the mat border, and the shoreline is also broken. So what you're seeing on screen is actually a wee bit different to how the photographers matted this print. And so the print creates a break which lets your eye wander outside of the frame, and you don't get that in your digital entry there. So I think if you're just taking a little bit more care mounting the print, the photographer could have avoided those issues. In terms of colour, I think the orange glow above the horizon, just a little bit muddy to my eye. I would have preferred to see a little more vibrance or a lift in the brightness, just to create a wee bit more contrast. And I think that would have made the print overall more effective, to give a counterpoint to the dominance of the blues. Overall, though, the print is beautifully printed and presented, and I like the photographer's choice of paper for the scene. And next we have Autumn Willow. There's a lovely light, ethereal photograph. It suggests the motion of willow leaves in the autumn breeze. I find the two diagonals coming in from top left to be a minor distraction that compete against the rest of the softness of the scene. For me, most of the interest is in that right-hand third. I think that's where the mix of the yellows and greens, the texture and detail, the balance of all those elements is spot on. And so that's where I find my eye sitting in that part of the frame. For this sort of work, I'd encourage photographers to explore matte papers. I know generally when you go to print, most printers will default to putting it on a luster or semi-gloss paper, but ask them if they've got a matte. Print it out on matte and see what you think. I think you'll find it gives the image a different quality, and you may prefer it to the slightly more glossy textures. Canterbury Draft is always one, isn't there? So we've got three of these fine animals standing obediently in line. The horse closest to us just can't resist having a wee sneaky peek around and seeing what else is going on. And for me, that creates a slight sense of comedy, which adds a layer of interest to the scene overall. The black and white treatment is well executed, I think. This print has a full range of tones through to the brightest whites to the darkest blacks. It gives a lovely sense of life. And the print is nicely printed and presented. We move into high acceptance now with score 4. I think it's a great capture of these two herons perched on a fallen tree amongst the wetland grasses. It's pleasing to see both birds captured in sharp detail, and I appreciate the composition with the birds facing each other from the vertical thirds of the frame. Personally, with the print, I find it to be a little cool overall, and I think it would have benefited from an overall warming of your tones to bring out the colours in the grasses a bit more. And just for context, it's another example, as I was mentioning before, where the print colour is different to what you're seeing on screen. So if your print comes out and it's not the colour that you want, ask your printer to run it again and have a look at the colour reproduction for you. Back to the comments though, I'm only judging your print. So although that's a bit warmer, I'm looking at the print and just come back to that colour management process when you print. Overall, I really appreciate the photographer's commitment being down in the weeds and observing the birds at their level, because it creates a much more engaging photograph that I enjoyed. My first impression of this print was one of impact. The subject's in clear focus, The bokeh's soft and undistracting. The colours are bright and vibrant. It's a lovely large print, so it's really wow when you first look at it. I think the image may have been slightly over sharpened during post-processing. It's just a few telltale halos around some of the edges. Sharpening tools can be really powerful, and one way to lessen their effect is to use local masks rather than global adjustments in post-processing. I was a wee bit curious about the title Spider Eater. So I did a wee bit of Googling again because I couldn't find spider eaters in the building code. And a quick Google text didn't actually reveal a species called a spider eater. So I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? Yeah, I must have been bored with the building code because I'll spend more time with this one. So I uploaded the image to Google image search, as you can do, and found out it's a garden sunbird. And further research showed that this was a female of the species, endemic to the Philippines. I thought, this is interesting stuff. In open competition, like this, there's no issue at all. I only mention it because to enter images like this into nature or natural history competitions, your titles need to be more accurate. So it's just something to be mindful of. The photograph's nicely printed, nicely mounted, and I'm sure would look lovely framed on the photographer's wall. All right, our next print. I really appreciate the moodiness of this waterfall scene, photographed in Indonesia. The way the surrounding rock face and foliage is sculpted, it lets the light create a sense of depth that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily see. So it gives me a lot more to look at than just the waterfall. I get a sense of peace and tranquility from the print, and I can imagine myself spending hours sitting at this place and being soothed by the calming beauty of nature around me there. There are some areas in the print that are very close to black, and for me, I think I would have preferred to see just a wee bit more detail in those darker shadow areas. Not a lot, but just a little bit that fills in that black space. As presented, I think the print is somewhat visually heavy over on the right-hand side because of that. The lighting on the left, though, to me has been beautifully handled. The exposure is well controlled. We can see all the detail in the water, so the shutter speed, it's not too slow, it's not too fast. It's just fast enough that we can see the detail of the water flow around the rocks at the base, and I think that's the sweet spot to aim for, so nicely done. The print's beautifully mounted. The attention to detail, this is what lifts prints up a level. You can see the wee fern at the top quarter over on the right-hand edge. That's not clipped by the mount. So even though it's right on the edge, the photographer's made sure that stays in the frame. So I appreciate those little details. And I think your selection of an entirely black matte really suits the moodiness that I felt when I was looking at the print. So the whole package works nicely together. Well done. Next we have the New Zealand alpine orchid, or a black screen. This one didn't score very high. There we go. For me, this is a beautiful portrait of an alpine orchid. Excuse me. I haven't spent much time trying to photograph these sorts of species myself, but my understanding is that most of our native orchids are actually quite small flowers. And you can go tramping through the bush and just walk straight past them. So with this particular species, I learned that the flowers are generally only about 15 to 20 millimeters across. So when we see it in print, we're looking at something that's much larger than what we're going to see it in real life, which is cool. It lets us see some lovely details, and the light is quite exquisite and nicely handled in the print. think the details could have benefited from just a little bit more sharpening before printing, mainly around the central part of the flower. Alternatively, you might have considered printing it on a matte paper, and that may have acted to camouflage some of that slight softness and maybe given the print a slightly more illustrative feel. Just depends what you're going for. But as presented, the print is beautifully presented. Our next print. I'm sure the girl from Jakarta would love to see her portrait. For me, it's a very classically simple portrait, captured very well. I find the brighter tones on the girl's headwear in the print are just a little bit distracting, and they compete for attention with her face. Just, eye sort of goes between both of them. In my opinion, the print needs a little bit more space down the right-hand side of the frame to bring the girl's face away from the edge. Other than those small details, I think the photographer's done a beautiful job connecting with the subject so that we're looking straight into her eyes. The presentation's beautiful and the mount echoes the background of the portrait. Nicely done. With flowers and paint, I'm drawn in by the vibrant colours that we have on display, alongside the swirling, milky texture of the background. Where the foliage is submerged, it creates a nice soft transition that's quite beautiful to my eye. The composition really works for me. I particularly like the overall arrow shape with the fern fronds that are formed there. Just a couple of presentation issues to mention. Firstly, again, there's some overcuts in the beveled edges, which do distract your eye a wee bit. And again, there's a thin margin of paper, top and bottom, where your window opening is too big for the print. So you either need to print a bit bigger, or it's, if the mount's already cut, just print a wee bit bigger so that you fill that. It's just those minor details that distract from your work. Overall, I find the concept of the last one, it's an interesting concept. I haven't seen that before with paint. And I think it's well executed. It's just those minor points on presentation to work on. Okay, we're nearly there. Score 5, onto the honours. Parallel labour. The first thing I saw is an agricultural barcode to my eye. I think there's a graphical element. The repeated lines creates a very strong photograph. The colour palette's beautifully simple and quite earthy with its greens and browns dominating. But then we have two pops of red that really pop out from the print, creating an effective contrasting element. The initial story I saw shows how much time I spent around farm equipment, was one of a race to the bottom, given the lower vehicle's closer proximity to the bottom of the frame. You're probably sitting there going like, once I looked a bit more closely, a bit more time, I realised the two vehicles are actually moving up the frame. And so that hidden story that I was looking for sort of went poof. And so it became more about the graphical than the story for me. And I think that's fine. But I thought it'd be curious as to how I'd interpreted it. I think the composition is effectively anchored. It's timed to perfection with that lower machinery crossing the horizontal track. And that to me is an example of waiting for the right moment and being patient. And I also think the print effectively demonstrates the capabilities of using equipment like drones, because it gives you those additional perspectives that we don't always get. And I could tell it was a drone shot because of the file name that was in the EXIF data. There's no hidden connection otherwise. But yeah, it's a nice example of that sort of technology. So congratulations on it and honours for that one. The next honours is mortality. There's a creepy cleverness on display in this print. The photographer's skill allows us to suspend disbelief and ponder the idea that while we watch what we eat, our food could well be watching us too. I think the compositing skills are excellent. There's a seamless blend of light, colour and texture between the eye and the orange. I think the reflection in the knife lends credibility to the scene and it forms a visual link to support the story that's in the title, Mortality. The horizontal placement of elements in the frame are supported by the photographer's selection of a panoramic crop. And I think that also gives you the necessary compositional balance to the print. And I think we need that breathing room around the subject to stop us becoming too overwhelmed or confronted with this big eye staring back at us. For me, it's a skillful print, full of imagination and creativity. And I think the photographer's done a fine job of turning everyday items into something a little bit funny, a little bit creepy, and something very different. So congratulations. And our best in show with a score of 6. Transportative. It's a kind of photograph that for me asks all sorts of questions. What's he listening to? Why is he there? How long till the next truck comes? For me, it's a good example where the photograph, where the title supports and serves the photograph, but you don't need the title to understand the photograph itself. The bokeh and receding lines frame our central subject well, and I think the blue clothing works really well to evoke a sense of moodiness in the overall scene. And that's complemented in the print by the overall colour treatment. So we've got nice soft matte colours printed on a matte paper. And that selection of the matte paper is what elevated this work for me, because it serves the intent of the artwork. And the print's mounted well. It's got plenty of breathing space on the mat to allow you to enjoy the image. If you look up close at the print, the guy's got a small cross worn on a necklace. Perhaps that helps keep the road clear until he returns from whatever place he's currently in. A well-executed piece, in my opinion, and again, best in show. There we go.
Thanks, Mike. That was, very informative. I hope everybody enjoyed that and got lots of takeaway advice. And congratulations to everyone. So we'll do the presentation now. Yep, happy to do that. Excuse me. Secret. Do you want to do that? Do you want to swap sides? So
You're the boss.
Well, okay. Okay. So we'll go back to the first of the acceptances. And we have the Gannet's Dive by Ian Walls. Giraffe and Impala in Kruger Park by John McCall.
Nice one, John.
Lovely picture of
Well done.
looking around for enemies.
Ah, there we go. So there's always more to the story.
For enemies.
Yeah.
God. Grey Warbler by Carolyn Alcock.
Well done.
Assignation by Anthony York. Kookaburra in Tree, Dawn Kirk.
Well done, Dawn.
Lost Among the Leaves, Adrian Gentleman.
Beautiful. Nice work.
Poppy, Robin Johansson.
Beautiful. Well done.
Iris by Shirley Wilson. I gave it to you. I couldn't read it all. Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry, Shirley. I'm sorry. It's past my bedtime.
Well done.
It's beautiful. Okay. The Art of Blade Shearing, Penny Kennedy. She's skiing in Canada. There's another 2 weeks skiing, I think.
Nice.
African Elephant Teaching Water Skills to Baby, Diana Andrews.
It's nice to be on opposite sides. Nice work.
Abstract Boats in Harbour, Maxine Cooper.
Well done.
Thank you.
Shadowlands, Nerily Keating. She's not. Autumn Willow, Adrian Gentleman.
Nice.
Canterbury Draft, Penny Kennedy. Okay, so Matuku Moana Pair, Dawn Kirk.
Nice one.
Oh, sorry. So the high acceptances. Spider Eater, Janet Munnings.
In Thailand.
Beautiful.
Thailand.
Yeah, nice.
Right, okay. Waterfall in, is it Sibodis, Indonesia? Alistair Phillips.
Thank you.
New Zealand Alpine Orchid, Calademia Lyali, Shirley Wilson.
Are they that big?
Excuse the pronunciation.
Small?
Really little.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nice one.
Girl from Jakarta, Alistair Phillips.
Beautiful as always.
Flowers in Paint, Janet Munnings.
Oh. Really cool technique, that. It's nice.
And now we go into the honours. We've got Parallel Labour, Toby Mears. Oh, well done, Toby. And now we get honours for Mortality, Rach Evans.
It's still creepy.
It is. It is.
Well done.
creepy. And you better stay here because you've got honours and best in show for transport.
Really well done.
Congratulations, everyone. Some fabulous images. You finished?
I think I've seen
You finished. Right, hang
Yeah.
on. I've got some for you. Hang on. Oh, sorry, Rach. I've got your ribbon here as well.
Back you come.
Come back. Oh, where's she gone? I'll come back with it. Thanks, Mike.
Thank
Just
you.
a little something
pleasure.
from us to say thank you for making the effort to come and speak to us
Not at all.
tonight
It's been
and
great to be back for a night.
share your critique. Thank you. Appreciate
you.
it. Shirley, you wanted to mention something if you'd like to pop up. You can talk from there, yeah. Okay, I'll give this to Rach.
Right. And what an auspicious night to be talking about the Laurie Thomas Winter School. So registrations opened this morning, and I just wanted to say we've already had 22 registrations. So, and we were limiting it to 32 places. So if you want to come, get in now, and particularly if you want a single room, because they're going like hotcakes. If you want the expensive rooms, there's plenty of those left, but the other ones, and of course, just to remind you that Mike is going to be the tutor at the winter school, and I think we've just seen how good he is tonight, so yeah. It'll be another good weekend, yeah. Yeah, yes, everyone's got the 3-day bazoe. Good.
Right. No, I'm looking forward to that, although I haven't put my name down yet. So, anybody else with any notices before we wrap up for tonight? No. Oh, John Suckling. Hi, John. When's that, John? Next Wednesday showcase. So make sure you've got your images in time. Oh, sorry, we've got another one. Oh yeah, if everybody's happy to do that. Rach, would you like to talk about your images? Sorry.
Can you just say that the convention is the date's been extended for people?
Okay, yeah, the convention dates, I believe, have been extended. So if you've suddenly changed your mind and you'd like to go, you will be able to get in. Okay, so how long has it been extended for, Janet? Do you know? Oh, which is when? Who knows? Yeah, okay, so another week or two. Okay, thank you. So, Rach, I'll pass this over to you. It's on the PSN.
That's an image of my youngest child, who's about a foot taller than me. I had to do an image for an assignment for my diploma, and the brief was a posed image that told a story. The facilitator didn't like it. Said that the story wasn't clear enough. So yeah, that was that. I probably had about 5 minutes before my son lost patience with me asking him to do these things. So yeah, that's that one. I'm not quite sure what I was thinking. It was my it was my husband's eye, and he was also very patient and let me photograph that. And then yeah, I don't really know why that came to me. Just to the orange is called Amos, and he's facing his own mortality.
It's good but creepy. Toby's not here, unfortunately, so we're watching from home. Janet?
Yeah. This image took 8 to 10 hours just to photograph it. I went into the verges and got the Queen's Anne lace, and all the little bits were from the South Island. The flowers were from my garden. It's in a tray that you put in the oven, and I fill it with water, and then I make the arrangement, and then I have to paint the water very quickly because the paint sinks. And as I'm painting around the water and the flowers, everything starts to move. So you have to get tweezers and put everything back. And then you quickly take the photo, put it on the computer, and if it's not sharp, I then have to take everything out of the water with tweezers, dry it on kitchen paper, and then start again. Now, this was for my fellowship. And then they went and changed the rules. So I can't really put them all in now. I've got about 6 of them, but they took an awful long time to make.
Which fellowship was this for you? For the L's or A's or a fellowship? F. Sorry, my mistake. Sorry. Yes. Yeah, it's beautiful. Dedication and patience. Yes, clearly. So we have the next. Alistair. There'll be a backstory for this young lady.
This was taken in Jakarta last year. I forget the name of the viewing platform you go up. It's like a big spire right in the middle of the huge, great big park in central downtown Jakarta. She was up there at the viewing platform with her mother. I asked permission from the mother. That was fine. A very distracting background, so there was a guy there with a black T-shirt, so I got him to stand in behind, and that's the result. So, and I showed her the image. I think you're talking about it'd be good if she saw it or something. Well, she did. I always show whoever I take the image on the back. Well, you're getting email addresses and things, but in reality, I've sent a few away and or emailed people. Yeah, when I came back, you come back with a whole travel journal full of email addresses, and as you can imagine.
Email them to everybody. Okay. Is that also Shirley? We do have another quick word. Tramping through the bush looking for orchids.
Yes, I was going to say, this is as hard as the paint one. So Mike was right, these are the size of about your little fingernail, and they're about 2 centimetres from the ground, and I took it with a macro lens, and so it's a stack of 40. And so that, and if there's even just the tiniest bit of wind, you've lost your stack because they're so it looks really interesting taking them because you've got your photo bag stopping any breeze. You're trying to get a light. For this one, I was actually hanging the camera underneath the tripod because it was down the edge of a bank. And then I had to get a stack of 40 and get them all crystal sharp. So it takes about half an hour and several swear words.
Do you find that when you get your macro lens out and you continue to do sticks, that the wind will then start to blow?
At others parts, I have to go at first thing after dawn.
Yeah.
Anything later than 10 o'clock in the
Yeah.
morning.
I had visions of you lying on the floor, actually.
I do. I sit, I lie in the moss, wobble around.
So, which camera do you use? Is it? Have you got a Sony? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I use an LED. I've got a little LED thing that I use because to actually get the light.
Sorry, I'm blocking the view. Yeah.
Get the light into the centre of the glass is virtually impossible without
Yeah. Yeah, I like the stem. Yeah. Okay, where are we up to? I'm still talking. Oh, JK. Alistair, do you want to should we, 2 seconds, all right?
Taken the deepest, darkest jungle in Indonesia. Yeah, I went down there and I had a great time photographing this waterfall. Took probably about half a dozen photos of it, and yeah, I was quite stoked. Yeah. Oh, it was probably something watching me. I don't know. Right, but no. That's good.
This is just a little bird I took in Thailand. I looked it up on the computer and it just said spider eater. So, yeah.
Very handsome spider eater anyway. Yep, good. Okay. Dawn, do you want to say a few? No. Oh, okay. Yeah, lovely. And they're on the same plane as well, aren't they? Yeah, it makes life a bit easier. Lovely. Okay, all right. Sorry, are we going to keep going? No. Okay, so it's gone past. So everybody had a good night, yes? All right, we'll see you next week. Drive safely, and thanks for coming. Oh, sorry? Yes, if you can just help put your chairs back. Thank you to the boys also for setting up. It's a long evening.